I never... I never wanted you.
Everything changed while you were in the hospital. This house is no longer yours. You have no place here. Find somewhere else to live. I froze. The wound still unhealed, throbbed painfully. I could not believe those words were coming from the mouth of my only son, the one I had dedicated my entire life to. I had only been hospitalized for 3 long weeks due to complications from my hip surgery. I returned with the hope of being reunited with my loved ones, only to find the door shut on the home Russell and I had built patiently over 30 long years. In that instant, I understood the betrayal. It was not just about losing my home. It struck a darker plot I could not yet fully grasp. Before we go on, do not forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We bring you new stories every day. Hit like and let us know what city you are watching from in the comments. My hospital discharge papers crinkled in my pocket as the taxi pulled up to my classic-style house. 21 days had felt like an eternity. Complications from my hip surgery had kept me battling fever and infection while the world continued to spin without me. I was exhausted, but relieved to finally be home. The 2-story house that Russell and I had lovingly restored during our 30 years of marriage stood before me, bathed in the late afternoon light. The roses I had planted decades ago still bloomed by the walkway, though they clearly needed tending after my absence. "Need help with your bags, ma'am?" the driver asked, glancing at my cane. "Just to the door, please," I replied, my voice rough from the dry hospital air. "My son should be waiting." The front door opened before we reached it. Caleb, my only son, stood in the doorway, but not with the smile I had expected. Instead, his face wore an expression I had never seen before, cold, distant, resolute. His voice echoed that same dry, formal tone. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of movement in the living room, his wife, Brielle. And were those her parents? "Caleb, what is going on?" I asked, stepping forward. He blocked the entrance, not moving aside. "You should not have come. We were expecting you tomorrow." The taxi driver set my small suitcase beside me, sensing the tension. I paid him quickly, suddenly wishing he would not leave. "There is no easy way to say this," Caleb continued as the taxi pulled away. "Things changed while you were hospitalized. This house is no longer yours." A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with my still recovering body. "What are you talking about?" "We made arrangements. Brielle's parents needed to move from Greystone Falls, and this house has much more space than you require. The documents are already signed. You will have to find somewhere else to live." My mind struggled to process his words. Documents I had not signed anything. "Caleb, this is absurd. Let me into my house right now." I stepped forward again, leaning heavily on my cane. This time Brielle appeared beside him. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she wore what I immediately recognized as my emerald earrings, Russell's gift for our 25th anniversary. "Lorraine," she said with that false sweetness I had learned to identify all too well over the years. "We have already packed your personal belongings. They are in boxes in the garage. We can send them wherever you are staying." From behind them, Brielle's parents, Graham and Denise Huxley, emerged. Over the years, I had barely seen them more than a few times. Graham, tall and elegantly athletic, with silver hair, had always struck me as arrogant. Denise, with her perpetually judgmental expression, never bothered to hide her disdain for my modest home, the very house she now stood in, as if she owned it. "I am sorry it came to this," Graham said, sounding not at all apologetic. But Caleb made the arrangements very clear. The house was legally transferred. Legally, I managed to stammer. That is impossible. I never signed anything. Caleb's face hardened. Power of attorney. Remember those papers you signed before your surgery for medical decisions? They also included financial matters. The revelation hit me like a brutal punch. Yes, I had signed a stack of documents handed to me by my own son. While I was anxious about the operation, I had trusted him blindly. I had not even read past the very first page. You tricked me, I said. The words sounded hollow, insufficient against the magnitude of the betrayal. We are doing what is best for everyone, Brielle interjected. This house is too much for you to maintain alone. Caleb has been managing it for years. Do not show up here again, Caleb finished firmly. We will send your things. The decision is final. I stood there leaning on my cane, staring at the son I had raised the boy. I had told bedtime stories to the teenager I had taught to drive the man whose college tuition I had paid by working extra shifts. Now he was a stranger wearing my son's face. This is illegal, I said softly, and you know it. It is done, he replied coldly. Do not make it harder. Something broke inside me, but not in the way they expected. No tears, no begging. It was a freezing clarity, a determination I had not felt since my years overseeing bank compliance. Enjoy it then, I said, simply turning away. Enjoy everything. The confusion on their faces at my calmness almost made the devastation worth it. Almost. As I limped toward the taxi, I had had the foresight to ask the driver to wait. I pulled out my phone not to call the police. Not yet. That would come later, in my own time, in my own way. Instead, I sent a single message to Marilyn Baird. Plan B. The hotel room in downtown Brighton Ridge was impersonal, but clean a temporary refuge while I regained my strength and clarity. My hands still trembled as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. Marilyn replied immediately, Stay safe. I am on my way. Marilyn and I had been friends for 40 years, ever since college. She had become a formidable lawyer while I had built my career in bank compliance. After Russell's death, she had helped me organize my affairs with a meticulousness born of our shared professional paranoia. Always have a backup plan, she had advised, especially when it came to family money. At the time, I thought she was exaggerating. Now her foresight seemed almost prophetic. A soft knock on the door announced her arrival. Despite the late hour, Marilyn looked impeccable in her tailored suit, her silver hair pulled back in her characteristic bun. Her expression, however, was pure fury. Those miserable vultures, she whispered with rage as she hugged me carefully, mindful of my still recovering body. Are you all right, physically or emotionally? I attempted a smile that did not reach my eyes. Both, I said barely. She placed her briefcase on the desk and began pulling out files with practiced efficiency. I am standing, which is something. The rest, I said, falling back onto the bed. I keep thinking I am going to wake up and all of this will be a nightmare caused by a fever. Marilyn's expression softened for a moment before she regained her professional mask. I have already started the process. The trust documentation is solid. Russell was meticulous. The house transfer will not withstand legal scrutiny. How long, I asked, to invalidate this fraudulent transfer? A few weeks, maybe months if they decide to play dirty. She paused. But Lorraine, there is something else, something I found while reviewing your accounts. My stomach clenched. What is it? Unusual withdrawals from your investment accounts during your hospitalization, large withdrawals. She handed me a printed statement. I scanned it quickly. My banking experience immediately detected the irregularities. 5 transfers totaling over $220,000, all to accounts I did not recognize, all made with digital signatures purportedly from me. While I was barely conscious in the intensive care unit, I whispered, feeling the full weight of the betrayal. They did not just take my house, they have been draining my accounts. There is something worse, Marilyn continued gravely. My legal assistant did a preliminary check on the Huxleys. Their real estate consulting business in Greystone Falls has several complaints that were mysteriously withdrawn before formal investigations began. And Brielle's LinkedIn profile shows experience at 3 mortgage companies that ended up closing due to regulatory violations. Everything clicked with chilling clarity. Are they involved in some kind of mortgage fraud? I asked. Marilyn nodded. And they have likely been planning it for months, waiting for the right moment. Your hospitalization gave them the perfect opportunity to accelerate their plans. My mind raced back to conversations from the past year, Brielle's growing interest in my finances, Caleb's seemingly casual questions about my bank accounts and contacts. The foundation of this betrayal had been built long before my surgery. Caleb, I said his name, catching in my throat. Do you think he knows what they are doing? Marilyn's silence was answer enough. I taught him better than that, I murmured, barely audible. His father taught him better too, Marilyn replied, her tone soft but firm. People change, Lorraine, especially when money is involved. The question now is, what do you want to do about it? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 67 years dedicated to building a career, a family, a home. When I opened them, something inside me had hardened. Everything, I answered. I want to do everything possible to reclaim what is mine and make them face the consequences. Everyone, even Caleb. Marilyn's eyebrow barely arched. No maternal protection clause, I said. He made his choice. Saying it hurt, but it was true. If he is involved in something illegal, he deserves what is coming. She nodded, satisfied with my determination. Then we will have to be smart, strategic. I have contacts in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Unit, who would be very interested in what we have uncovered. I have some contacts too, I replied, thinking of former colleagues. But I do not want to move too quickly. They think I am defeated, a helpless old woman who will quietly retreat. That perception gives us an advantage. What are you thinking? I reached into my bag and pulled out a small black notebook, my lifeline during my banking years. First, we document everything, every withdrawal, every forged document, every lie told. Then we follow the money trail. If they are setting up a fraud, there will be patterns. Marilyn smiled, that sharp, predatory smile I remembered from our youth. And then, I said, feeling a cold determination course through me. We spring the trap when they least expect it. We began to outline the plan. My phone buzzed with a message from Caleb. Mom, we need the passwords to your investment accounts to transfer the remaining funds for your care. Send them as soon as possible. I showed the message to Marilyn, who shook her head in disgust. What do I say? I asked. Nothing yet, she replied. Let them wonder. Let them worry. I nodded, setting the phone aside. The old Lorraine would have responded instantly, eager to calm the waters, to maintain peace at any cost. But that Lorraine had been left behind at the door of the house they stole from me. This Lorraine was playing the long game, holed up in a hotel room. I reconnected with my best friend and lawyer, Marilyn, who revealed shocking news. Not only had they seized my house, but they were also draining my accounts while I was hospitalized. Upon discovering suspicious movements in the Huxleys' business history, I had to confront the heartbreaking possibility that my own son was involved in something truly sinister. Still recovering physically, but firmer in my resolve, I made a key decision. Instead of confronting them immediately, I would let them believe they had won while I silently built the case that would be their undoing. "You have to see this," Marilyn said, sliding her laptop across the hotel desk. 3 days had passed since my humiliating eviction. We had moved to a more comfortable extended stay suite, paying cash to leave no electronic traces. My physical strength was slowly returning, though the emotional wounds remained raw. The screen displayed property records from my neighborhood. I squinted, reviewing the document. "The third property from the bottom," Marilyn indicated. My eyes widened in shock. The Miller family, 2 houses down, had sold their home 3 months ago. The buyers, Huxley Crest Holdings, LLC. "That cannot be a coincidence," I murmured. "Even better," Marilyn said, flipping through more documents. "The Henderson family across the street sold to the same company last month, and the retired couple on the corner already have their house under contract with that same buyer." "They are buying up the whole neighborhood," I whispered, watching the scheme take shape. "But why?" Marilyn opened a zoning request filed with the city planning department 2 weeks ago while I was still in the hospital. They submitted this proposal to change the zoning for the entire block from single-family residential to mixed-use commercial. The news hit me like a punch. My neighborhood was right on the edge of downtown Brighton Ridge's rapidly expanding district. With the new zoning property, values would skyrocket. They're using my house as headquarters while they buy up the other homes around it, I said, suddenly understanding how all the pieces fit together. As soon as they control enough of the block, they can force the change and values will at least triple. Marilyn finished. With current market prices, we are talking about a potential profit of between $15 and $20 million. My banking experience immediately grasped the magnitude of the plan, but they needed enormous initial capital to start buying. "Where would they get it from?" I asked. Marilyn's expression darkened. "That is where it gets concerning. I asked an investigator friend to check some records. The Huxleys have a history in Greystone Falls. They identify vulnerable homeowners, mostly seniors, or those with financial troubles, and use predatory loans to seize their properties." "Mortgage fraud," I said, remembering the term well from my years at the bank. "Exactly. They offer refinancing that is too good to be true. They manipulate appraisals with false reports and structure the loans in such a way that they inevitably fail. When the owners cannot pay, they swoop in and buy the properties for a fraction of their worth." I thought of my neighbors, many of them elderly, living on fixed incomes in homes they had owned for decades, perfect victims. And my accounts. The money they have been transferring is surely the initial capital. They needed funds for the first purchases and to cover expenses until the plan paid off. My investment portfolio was the most convenient source. The calculated cruelty of it all took my breath away. It was not just about my home and my money. It was about using it to destroy my entire community, people who had been at Russell's funeral, who had brought me food when I became a widow. "And Caleb," I asked finally, voicing the doubt that had haunted me, "how involved is he?" Marilyn hesitated before opening another folder. "This was recorded 3 weeks ago at the Crescent Bay Federal Bank." The security video showed Caleb and Brielle entering the bank together and meeting with a loan officer. The timestamp showed it was 2 days after my surgery, while I was still heavily sedated in the intensive care unit. I realized they had used the power of attorney to open my safe deposit box. I understood this when I recognized the bank where I kept my important documents. Yes, Marilyn confirmed, and according to the access log, they removed several items, including the original deed to your property and the trust papers. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed for a moment. My own son, the boy who once demanded absolute fairness when playing board games, who had returned a wallet with $50 inside. How could he have become this person? There is something else you should see, Marilyn said softly, showing me a chain of emails. My contacts at the Securities and Exchange Commission sent these to me. The Huxleys have been on their radar for a while. The emails were between Brielle and her father, dated almost 8 months ago. They discussed their plans in thinly veiled language, pointing out properties in my neighborhood, evaluating which owners could be prey to their deceptions. And most disturbing, they mentioned my house as their operation center once they gained control of it. One particular phrase chilled my blood, still hesitant but yielding. It read, "Mother unlikely to fully recover from scheduled surgery, accelerated timeline." Scheduled surgery, I repeated almost as a whisper. My hip replacement was not an emergency. It had been scheduled months in advance. Lorraine, Marilyn's voice sounded like a warning, as if preparing me for a blow. They were waiting for this. They knew you would be vulnerable after surgery. She continued, the horrible truth dawning on me. They were counting on it. We do not know if Caleb understood the full extent, Marilyn started. Enough. I raised my hand, unable to accept any more excuses for my son. He knew enough. He knew they wanted my house, my money. He knew they were planning something while I was incapacitated. The pain of that certainty was sharper than any surgical blade. My own son had not only betrayed me, but he had done so with calculation and coldness. I stood ignoring the protest from my recovering hip and walked to the window. The Brighton Ridge skyline gleamed under the sunset, indifferent to my human tragedy unfolding in its streets. "What do you want to do?" Marilyn asked softly. I turned to her, my decision crystal clear. "I want justice," I replied simply. "Not just for myself, but for everyone, for those they have cheated or plan to cheat, and I want my house back." Marilyn nodded, serious but firm. "Then we will have to move cautiously. They think they have already won. That gives us the element of surprise." "Good," I replied. A plan was already forming in my head because I was about to give them the surprise of their lives. As I reviewed the property records with Marilyn, a disturbing pattern emerged. The Huxleys had been systematically buying homes throughout my neighborhood, preparing an ambitious rezoning plan worth millions. The betrayal hurt even more when I discovered evidence that Caleb was not just an opportunist. He had known about the plans for months. He might even have calculated the takeover to coincide precisely with my surgery. With my community and my longtime neighbors endangered by their predatory scheme, my resolve hardened. It was no longer just about getting my house back. It was about stopping a sophisticated fraud operation before more vulnerable people fell victim. And I was precisely the person who knew how to do it. "Lorraine, are you sure about this?" Marilyn asked with concern, watching me apply makeup in the hotel bathroom mirror. "Your hip is still healing." I spent 21 days in that hospital bed feeling helpless. I replied, applying lipstick with a steady hand. "I am done with helplessness." A week had passed since my eviction. In that time, Marilyn and I had meticulously reconstructed how the Huxleys' operation worked. Their business in Greystone Falls had left a trail of financial victims seniors who lost everything through predatory contracts and forged documents. Now they were replicating the same scheme in Brighton Ridge using my house as their base. The timing has to be perfect, I reminded her, giving myself a final look in the mirror. My elegant gray pantsuit and discreet jewelry projected exactly the image I wanted. Not a defeated old woman, but a banking professional with decades of experience. The agents are quiet, Marilyn confirmed. They are ready. They will only act when we give the signal. After discovering the magnitude of the scam, we had taken our evidence to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Unit. The agents had been building a case against the Huxleys for months, but they lacked the internal access we could now offer. We struck a deal. They would postpone immediate arrests to let us gather more solid evidence, and in return, I would have priority in recovering my assets. Remember, we need documented proof that they are using my identity and my financial information. I recited the key points of our strategy: bank access, forged signatures, explicit recognition of the plan. Without those documents, they could claim I voluntarily surrendered everything. Marilyn nodded as she checked her watch. Brielle's weekly salon appointment starts in 2 minutes. She will be out for at least 2 hours. Graham and Denise are at a real estate viewing across town. And Caleb, according to his calendar, will not be back from work until 5 o'clock. Perfect. My son's predictable routine, which I once found endearing, was now my strategic advantage. I took a deep breath to steady myself. Let's go. The taxi dropped me 2 blocks from my house. I walked slowly, using the cane more as a facade of fragility than for actual support. The neighborhood looked the same as always, with well-tended gardens, old homes, and the grand oak on the corner where Caleb had built a treehouse. Yet everything felt different to me, stained by the certainty of what was secretly happening. As I approached the house, I noticed subtle changes. The roses I had cared for so many years were gone, replaced by generic plants. The porch furniture Russell and I had restored was no longer there. The transformation had begun, erasing the traces of our family. I did not go to the front door. I preferred to circle around to the side entrance, the one leading to the kitchen, which in my haste to get to the hospital, I had forgotten to lock. For years, it had been our secret. Caleb, as a teenager, used it to sneak in after curfew, thinking I did not know. The key turned easily in the lock. I entered silently, just catching the sound of unfamiliar voices coming from my study. Following the sound, I stopped in front of the half-open door. The closing with the Miller family is scheduled for Friday, a masculine voice said, which I recognized as Graham Huxley. Once that is done, we will control 40% of the block. And the Henderson property, another unfamiliar voice asked, likely a partner. That is already resolved. We used Mrs. Whitlow's banking credentials to secure the financing, clean as a whistle. My hand gripped my cane tightly. They were using my name and my banking reputation to orchestrate their frauds. Exactly what we needed to prove. I activated the recorder on my phone before pushing the door open. The scene froze like a painting. Graham Huxley, seated behind Russell's antique desk, his partner standing by the window, all staring at me with naked astonishment. "Hello, Graham," I said calmly, stepping into the study where they were discussing business. "Lorraine." Graham reacted, immediately standing up. "This is unexpected. How did you get in through the door?" I replied directly. The same door to the house that still belongs to me legally. His partner, a nervous man in his 30s, looked at us uneasily. Do you want me to come back later, Mr. Huxley? He asked, voice wavering. No need, I answered, before Graham could open his mouth. I just came to pick up some personal papers I need. Graham's expression hardened. This property is no longer yours. Caleb was very clear about that. Yes, he was. I nodded, walking toward the filing cabinet in the corner. Very clear about his intentions, just as clear that you are using my banking credentials for your financing operations. Color drained from Graham's face. I do not know what you are talking about, do I? He stammered. I opened the cabinet drawer and pulled out a folder. The Henderson property, using my data to secure funds. I just heard you discussing it. The partner began backing toward the exit. Mr. Huxley, I think I'd better go, he muttered, trying to leave. Lorraine is confused, Graham said brusquely, attempting a show of concern. Her recent hospitalization affected her mental state, did it not? I smiled coldly as I closed the drawer. My mind is perfectly clear, clear enough to understand what you, Denise, and Brielle are plotting, clear enough to wonder if my son truly understands the legal consequences of the fraud he is facilitating. Graham's face changed the mask of concern, dissolving to reveal pure, calculated menace. You have no proof of anything, and even if you did, no one would believe you over your own son. Now get out before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. I nodded as if evaluating his words. You are right about one thing, Graham. Proof is essential. I raised my phone, clearly displaying the recording app. That is why I made sure to get it. His eyes widened with fury, erasing any remaining surprise. Give me that phone, he demanded. I do not think so. I took a measured step backward, keeping my calm despite my pounding heart. I have what I came for. Enjoy the house while you can. As I turned to leave, Graham lunged, gripping my arm with bruising force. You are not leaving with that recording. I had not anticipated a physical confrontation. A sharp pain shot through my still recovering hip as I struggled to stay upright. Let go of me, I demanded, raising my voice deliberately to draw attention. Give me the phone first, he growled, trying to snatch it with his other hand. At that instant, the front door burst open. Federal Bureau of Investigation hands where we can see them. Agent Dana Merrick and Agent Cole Thatcher stormed in weapons drawn. Graham froze, then slowly released my arm, raising his hands. Our contingency plan, activated by the panic button app on my phone, had worked perfectly. Are you all right? One of the agents asked. Yes, I replied, leaning against the doorframe. And I think I have something you will find very interesting. Taking a calculated risk, I had returned to my house, taking advantage of Brielle's absence and entering through a forgotten side door to surprise Graham in the middle of discussing his frauds. When confronted, his initial surprise transformed into a menacing attitude, forcing our Federal Bureau of Investigation contacts to intervene earlier than planned. Although the confrontation turned physical, I managed to secure the proof. We needed a recording where Graham explicitly admitted to using my banking credentials in his scheme. As he was led away in handcuffs, I understood that this was just the beginning of dismantling their entire operation. The real test would come when my son discovered what was happening and that his mother was responsible for the Huxleys' downfall. The Federal Bureau of Investigation office was impersonally cold beige walls, functional furniture, and a faint smell of coffee and paper. I waited in an interview room, my hip aching, despite the extra-strength painkiller Agent Dana Merrick had offered me. "Mrs. Whitlow," Agent Cole Thatcher commented, closing his notebook, "your recording is incredibly valuable. Combined with the financial documentation you and Marilyn provided, we have enough to secure search warrants for all of the Huxleys' properties and records." "And what about my house?" I asked. "And my accounts?" "A judge has already issued an emergency order freezing any transactions related to your property," he assured me. "No one can sell or transfer it until legal ownership is clarified." I felt a deep sense of relief, though I knew this was just the beginning. The Huxleys were in custody, but Caleb and Brielle still knew nothing of what had happened. What happens now? I wanted to know. "We will execute search warrants at their residence tonight," Merrick explained. "Brielle will be taken in for questioning. As for your son," the agent hesitated, softening her professional tone slightly. "Based on your statements, we will have to determine the level of involvement he may have had." The door opened and Marilyn entered, her face serious but satisfied. "The first court orders have just arrived. They are simultaneously moving on the Huxleys' offices in Greystone Falls." "Mrs. Whitlow," Thatcher said cautiously, "we understand this is complicated. If you would prefer not to be present when we execute the warrant at your house, I will be there." I interrupted firmly. "This is my home. I want to see this through to the end." 3 hours later, I was in an unmarked Federal Bureau of Investigation vehicle parked across from my house. The evening light was fading, lengthening shadows across the lawn where Caleb once played as a child. Brielle's car was in the driveway. She had returned from her salon appointment, completely unaware that her father was being processed at the Federal Detention Center. "In position," Merrick murmured from the driver's seat, listening to updates through her earpiece. Brielle Huxley, confirmed inside along with her daughter, arrived earlier than expected. My heart tightened. Caleb was not supposed to be home yet. I had hoped to spare him the public spectacle of what was about to happen. I had even arranged for him to be approached separately at his office. Now he would experience the full force of the raid alongside his wife. "Are you sure you want to witness this?" Marilyn asked beside me, covering my hand with hers. Before I could answer, a convoy of vehicles appeared down the street, 3 unmarked sedans and a tactical van. They pulled up in front of my house, and agents disembarked with synchronized movements, some wearing the characteristic Federal Bureau of Investigation jackets. "Federal agents, we have a warrant." The words resonated clearly in the quiet neighborhood as they approached the front door. I did not hear the response from inside, but the door opened. A moment later, from my angle, I could see Brielle in the doorway, her face shifting from confusion to shock. Behind her, Caleb appeared, positioning himself protectively beside his wife. "It is time," Merrick said, opening her door. "Please stay behind us." As we crossed the street, neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. I felt their curious, concerned gazes, some perhaps even relishing the unfolding drama. Brielle was the first to see me approaching behind the agents. Her carefully maintained composure shattered. "You," she spat, her voice rising hysterically. "You did this." Caleb's eyes locked onto mine. His expression shifted from confusion to horror as he understood that I was with the federal agents, not being questioned like them. "Mom," his voice cracked slightly, "what is going on?" "Your mother has provided evidence of a large-scale financial fraud committed by the Huxley family," Agent Cole Thatcher stated formally. "We have a warrant to search these premises and confiscate all relevant documents and electronic devices." Fraud, Caleb repeated, looking genuinely confused. What fraud? This is absurd. It is, I said, advancing my cane, tapping a rhythm against the ground. Graham was very clear this morning about using my banking credentials to secure fraudulent financing in my study in my house. Brielle's face drained of all color. You were here? How did you do it? The side door, I replied simply. There are some things about this house you never bothered to learn, Brielle, like the fact that it legally belongs to a trust created by my late husband Russell, which cannot be transferred without the signature of all trustees, including Marilyn, who certainly never signed anything. Have you ever faced a betrayal so deep from family that it forced you to protect yourself instead of trusting them? Share your thoughts in the comments, even just comment number 1, if you understand this pain. Caleb looked at me and then at his wife, growing increasingly desperate. Mom, it has been a misunderstanding. We wanted to help you by stealing my house, draining my accounts, setting up your in-laws in a property scheme, using my financial reputation. My voice remained firm, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. That is not helping, Caleb. That is fraud. That is theft. Mrs. Huxley, we need you to come with us for questioning, Merrick interjected, gesturing toward one of the vehicles. Brielle's surprise gave way to a calculated calm. I want my lawyer present. I will not say anything without representation. That is your right, Thatcher acknowledged before turning to Caleb. Mr. Whitlow will also need to speak with you. I do not understand, Caleb said, his voice hollow. Mom, what have you done? The question, so backward, so revealing of his inability to recognize his own culpability, hit me like a punch. What have I done? I repeated, staring at him. I have protected myself and others from people who believe they can take whatever they want without consequences. I taught you better than this, Caleb. Your father taught you better. As agents led Brielle toward a waiting vehicle, she turned with unexpected venom. You think you have won. You have no idea what will happen when my father's lawyers get involved. Your father is already in custody, I interrupted calmly. And your mother, too. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is currently searching your offices in Greystone Falls. It is over, Brielle. Her face twisted with fury as agents firmly guided her into the car. Caleb remained on the porch, watching in disbelief as other agents entered our house carrying equipment to collect evidence. Mom, he murmured as I turned to follow Marilyn back to our vehicle. I did not know everything they were planning. You have to believe me. I paused, observing the face of the son I had raised, searching for truth in his eyes. Perhaps you did not know everything, I conceded. But you knew enough, Caleb, and still you chose them instead of me. As I walked away, I heard his broken voice behind me. Where am I supposed to go now? I did not look back. That question echoed the very one I had faced when he threw me out of my own home. The symmetry was not lost on me, but unlike my son, I found no satisfaction in his anguish, only a profound sadness for what we had both lost. Some betrayals, I was learning, leave wounds too deep for simple forgiveness. As Federal Bureau of Investigation agents searched my house, arrested Brielle, and questioned Caleb, I watched from across the street, torn between vindication and pain. The confusion on my son's face when he realized I had orchestrated his downfall soon transformed into desperate denial, claiming ignorance of the plan. Brielle's mask of composure finally broke, revealing the calculating criminal she had always been. While another part of me recoiled at Caleb's pleading question, where am I supposed to go now? I recognized the poetic justice. He was experiencing exactly what he had put me through, Some lessons come at a terrible cost, but as I walked away from the house, I would soon reclaim I knew this confrontation was only the first step on a longer path toward justice and perhaps one day healing. In that moment, I realized my story now belonged among the best revenge stories, not because of triumph alone, but because of the painful truth that justice always carries a price. You should eat something, Lorraine. Marilyn pushed a container of soup toward me on the hotel desk we had converted into a makeshift office. 3 days had passed since the Federal Bureau of Investigation operation. 3 days of statements, evidence review, and legal hearings, leaving me almost no space to process everything that had happened. I am not hungry, I replied, reviewing the latest packet of documents Marilyn had brought from her office. You have not been hungry in days, she insisted. Your body is still recovering. You need strength. I sighed, knowing she was right. The physical toll and constant tension had caught up with me. Reluctantly, I opened the container and tried a spoonful of the chicken soup. Better. Marilyn nodded, satisfied. Now we should discuss tomorrow's meeting. The meeting she referred to would be my first face-to-face encounter with Caleb since the operation. He had requested it through his lawyer, a young public defender named Ethan Crowell, who had contacted Marilyn the day before. He says he did not understand the extent of the Huxley's operation, Marilyn continued in a neutral tone. He claims Brielle kept him in the dark about almost everything, and that the power of attorney he tricked you into signing allowed him to transfer funds from your accounts. I could not help the bitterness that crept into my voice. He was in the dark about those two as well. Marilyn's expression softened. I am not defending him, Lorraine. I am just relaying what his lawyer said. I set my spoon down on the plate, no longer wanting to eat. What else did this Crowell say? Caleb wants to cooperate fully with the investigation. He has offered to give detailed testimony about Brielle and her parents in exchange for his situation being considered in his own process. He is betraying them. The idea should not have surprised me, and yet it did. The Caleb I knew had always been fiercely loyal. Survival instinct, Marilyn suggested. The evidence against the Huxleys is overwhelming. He is making the most convenient legal decision. And what does he want from me? I asked, though I already suspected. Officially nothing. The meeting is supposedly just for him to give you his version of events. Marilyn's skeptical tone made it clear she did not believe that was the whole truth. Unofficially, my impression is that he hopes you will speak to the prosecutors on his behalf. A mother's plea for leniency could carry a lot of weight. I closed my eyes, exhausted to my core. The thought of facing Caleb, of listening to his justifications and excuses, squeezed my chest with pain. You do not have to meet him, Marilyn reminded me softly. At this point, you owe him nothing. I know, I said, but I need answers, Marilyn. I need to understand how my son could become someone capable of doing this. The interview room in the federal building was cold and stark, a metal table, uncomfortable chairs, and a large mirror that undoubtedly concealed an observation room. I sat with Marilyn beside me, my hands clasped on the table to hide their slight tremor. When the door opened, I barely recognized the man who entered. Caleb, my son, always self-assured and well-groomed, looked disheveled. His usual suit had been replaced by wrinkled khaki pants and a simple shirt. The shadow of stubble on his face revealed he had not shaved in days. "Mom," he said as he took a seat across from me. His lawyer, a serious young man with wire-rimmed glasses, sat beside him. "Caleb," I greeted, trying to keep my voice steady. A tense silence stretched between us. Neither of us knew how to begin this impossible conversation. Mrs. Whitlow, Ethan Crowell, finally spoke. My client requested this meeting to clarify certain aspects of the situation that he believes have been misunderstood. I am listening, I replied, my gaze fixed on Caleb, not his lawyer. Caleb cleared his throat. First, I want you to know, I never wanted things to go this far. When Brielle and I talked about her parents moving to Brighton Ridge, it was meant to be temporary, just until they found their own place. And the power of attorney, I interrupted him. The one you tricked me into signing before my surgery. He lowered his gaze in shame. That was Brielle's idea. She said it was just a precaution in case decisions needed to be made while you recovered. Yet you used it to transfer my house and empty my accounts, I accused. He hesitated, glancing at his lawyer, who barely nodded. That was all Brielle and Graham. They said they were moving some funds to safer investments for your retirement. I did not know they were actually stealing. I watched his face, searching for the truth in his eyes. There was desperation, no doubt, and fear. But was it genuine remorse, or just regret at being caught? The house, I insisted. You yourself told me I could not come back. You stood at the door of the home your father and I built and told me it was no longer mine. His eyes fixed on the table. Brielle convinced me it was for the best. She told me the house was too much for you, that you would be happier in a senior living community. He swallowed hard. I thought we were helping you, he added, referring to kicking me out with only the clothes on my back and leaving my personal belongings in boxes in the garage. The calm I had maintained began to crack. That is not helping, Caleb. That is cruelty. I know, he murmured. Now I know. What did they have against you? I blurted out. It was the question that had tormented me for days. Brielle and her parents, what power did they have over you that you would betray your own mother like this? Caleb suddenly lifted his head, surprised. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Whitlow, Ethan Crowell interjected. We should focus on... No. Caleb interrupted. She deserves to know. He took a deep breath. 3 years ago, I made some bad investments. I lost a lot of money, our savings, part of our retirement fund. I was desperate to get it back before Brielle found out. Graham offered to help. He said he had secure investment opportunities. He lent you money, I guessed. Caleb nodded, his expression dejected at first. Yes, then it became more complicated. I signed papers. I got involved in their businesses without really understanding what they were about. By the time I realized what was happening, I was already caught up in several of their frauds. They had leverage over you, Marilyn observed. They had me in their hands, Caleb corrected bitterly. Brielle made it clear that if I did not cooperate with their plans, her father would make sure I took all the blame. I tried to process this new information, attempting to reconcile it with the son I thought I knew. And my house, my accounts, a test of loyalty, he admitted, shrugging his shoulders in shame to show I was committed to the operation. Brielle said that once the neighborhood land was rezoned, we would make enough money so I could comfortably place you somewhere else. Did you actually believe that? I could not hide the disbelief in my voice. I wanted to believe it, Caleb replied softly. It was easier than accepting what I was really doing. The brutal sincerity of those words hit me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I glimpsed the son I remembered, the boy who, when caught lying, would eventually admit the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Caleb, I said carefully, what exactly are you asking of me today? For the first time, he held my gaze. Nothing, Mom. I do not deserve your help or your forgiveness. I just... His voice cracked slightly. I needed you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was weak and I was scared. I made terrible decisions. Whatever happens now, I will accept it. The simplicity and dignity of his answer, so different from the desperate excuses I had imagined, disarmed me completely. Before I could respond, a knock on the door interrupted us. Agent Dana Merrick entered, nodding apologetically. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have an urgent matter. Mrs. Whitlow, could you step out for a moment?" In a cold, aseptic federal building interview room, I finally faced my son, seeking answers to the betrayal that tore our family apart. Instead of the excuses I expected, Caleb revealed a more complex truth. He had become entangled with the Huxley's business years ago out of economic desperation, becoming their pawn through blackmail and manipulation. Although his explanation did not justify what he had done, admitting that the transfer of the house was a test of loyalty designed by Brielle offered me the first painful glimpse of the son I thought I knew. Just as that revelation began to change my understanding of things, Agent Merrick burst in with urgent news, hinting at a new turn in an increasingly tangled case. Despite everything, I found myself wondering if perhaps there was a way forward amidst this devastation, not back to what once was, but towards something different, built on painful truth, not comfortable illusions. Agent Merrick led me to a small conference room down the hall. Marilyn followed closely, her normally steady demeanor somewhat altered, which immediately put me on alert. "What has happened?" I asked as the door closed behind us. "We have been executing new search warrants tied to the Huxley's files," Merrick explained, placing a folder on the table. "A team in Greystone Falls found something you need to see." She opened the folder and pulled out several photographs, carefully arranging them in front of me. I leaned in, observing the overwhelming images with growing bewilderment. They showed a private hospital room, medical equipment, and a patient in a bed. "I do not understand," I said, looking up. "What does this have to do with—" The words caught in my throat as I focused on the last photo. The patient was me unconscious, connected to monitors in the intensive care unit during my recent hospitalization. These were found in a hidden safe in Graham Huxley's Greystone Falls office, Merrick explained quietly. Next to them, she gently placed another set of documents on the table. They were my medical records, doctor's notes, detailed medication orders, and my own clinical charts, which under normal circumstances should have been under strict protection at St. Emery Medical Center. How did they get these? Marilyn asked, her lawyer's instinct immediately grasping the deep implications. "That's what concerns us," Agent Dana Merrick replied. "The timestamps on these photos do not match regular visiting hours, and these documents contain sensitive information that family members would not normally have access to." A sharp shiver ran through me as I began to understand what she was truly implying. Someone inside the hospital must have been collaborating with them. Agent Dana nodded grimly. "We have identified a nurse who accessed your records on multiple occasions, specifically during times when neither Caleb nor Brielle were present. Phone records show multiple calls exchanged between this person and Graham Huxley. But why, I asked, trying to understand why they would monitor me so closely and with such intensity. Marilyn's face had turned pale as she examined the stack of documents. "Lorraine, look at these medication notes," she said in a tense whisper. I followed her finger to a handwritten note on one of the charts. A dosage adjustment in my post-surgical pain management had been made. The original prescription was crossed out and replaced with a significantly higher dose, written in clearly different handwriting. Your recovery took longer than expected, Agent Dana explained carefully. The infection that kept you hospitalized for 21 days instead of the usual 5 to 7, we are investigating whether it might have been deliberately caused. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying they tried to... I could not finish the sentence. We are not making any formal accusations yet, she clarified immediately. But we are actively investigating the possibility that someone may have deliberately attempted to prolong your hospitalization in order to give the Huxleys more time to execute their plans. I gripped the edge of the table, suddenly dizzy. The thought that someone had manipulated my medical treatment, risking my life, was almost too horrifying to comprehend. Does Caleb know about this? I managed to ask. Not yet, she replied. We wanted to inform you first, due to the very personal nature of this discovery. Marilyn placed her hand gently over mine, her expression deeply grave. Lorraine, if someone intentionally altered your care, this case escalates significantly. We are no longer just talking about fraud or elder abuse. This could possibly involve attempted... I know I interrupted, unable to hear that word, spoken aloud. The possibility was simply too monstrous to confront directly. There's something else. Agent Dana continued, her discomfort clearly visible. We found a life insurance policy in your name taken out 6 months ago. The beneficiary is listed as Caleb Whitlow. I felt the room slowly tilt beneath me. Caleb knew I whispered the final fragments of hope I still clung to for my son crumbling into dust. He had to know. Not necessarily, Agent Dana warned gently. The application bears his signature, but we have already identified several forged documents in this case. We need to investigate further before drawing any definitive conclusions. I closed my eyes, trying hard to resist this new and devastating wave of betrayal. If Caleb had truly been aware of these maneuvers, if he had been complicit in a threat against my life, then everything he had told me back in the interview room was nothing but a lie. That image I clung to of my real son, the one I thought I had seen, was nothing more than another cruel manipulation. I need to see him again, I said softly, opening my eyes with a renewed sense of resolve. Right now, Mrs. Whitlow, with this new information, we advise you not to, Agent Dana began. I need to see his face when he hears this, I insisted, firmer this time. That is how I will know if he knew. After 21 years as a compliance officer and a lifetime as a mother, I had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect lies. I had to look Caleb in the eyes when this bomb finally dropped. Agent Dana hesitated, then gave a slow nod. We were going to question him about these findings anyway. If you insist on being present, we can arrange it. When we returned to the room, Caleb and his lawyer were speaking in hushed, tense tones. His lawyer leaned forward immediately, his expression sharpening with caution. Agent Merrick, my client has cooperated fully. If you are implying he participated in any kind of... I am not implying anything yet, Agent Dana interrupted firmly. I am simply asking for an explanation of these documents. I cannot explain it because I had nothing to do with it. Caleb's voice rose with panic. Brielle handled all our insurance matters. She said we were just updating our policies. I signed whatever she put in front of me. The raw fear in his eyes, not just fear of consequences, but a true horror at what had been done, revealed more than any words ever could. My son had been weak, naive, and morally fragile, but I did not believe he had consciously participated in a plan that could have endangered my life. Do you realize what this means, Caleb? I asked quietly. Your wife and her parents might have been planning something far worse than just stealing my house. He covered his face with both hands, his shoulders beginning to tremble under the weight of reality. "Oh God," he whispered, "what have I done? What have I allowed to happen?" Seeing my son finally confront the full magnitude of his wife's betrayal, I felt an unexpected wave of compassion wash over me. Caleb had made terrible, unforgivable decisions. He had betrayed me in ways I never thought possible. But he was also a victim, another casualty of the Huxleys' manipulation, just another pawn in a game far darker than even he had ever imagined. "I need to amend my statement," he suddenly said, looking up with new determination etched on his face. "I need to tell you everything I know about Brielle and her parents. Everything." A devastating revelation shattered what little remained of my already broken world. There was solid evidence now suggesting that the Huxleys had deliberately complicated my medical recovery, possibly even putting my life at risk. Most shocking of all was the discovery of a life insurance policy in my name with Caleb listed as the sole beneficiary. When confronted with this horrifying piece of evidence, my son's raw and genuine horror and shock told me exactly what I had so desperately needed to know. Although he had betrayed me in deeply painful ways, he was not directly implicated in this monstrous element of the plan. While Caleb now faced the unbearable truth about his wife's actions, his sudden determination to reveal everything hinted that even darker, more disturbing secrets were still waiting to be uncovered. Despite the persistent anger burning inside me, I found myself thinking, perhaps amidst this nightmare, the first fragile seeds of redemption might be starting to sprout. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe understanding. 17 properties, Agent Cole Thatcher said, spreading a large map across the center of the conference room table. All of them acquired through the same web of fraudulent methods, all funneled through shell companies connected directly to the Huxley family. 2 weeks had passed since the explosive revelations about my tampered medical records. I had since been moved to a safe, anonymous apartment arranged and protected by the FBI. Only Marilyn and the agents assigned directly to my case knew my exact location. The investigation had grown rapidly, uncovering a criminal network far wider and more organized than anyone initially suspected. And the nurse, I asked the question that had haunted my nights since I first learned someone may have deliberately interfered with my recovery. "Kendra Lowell." Agent Dana replied, pushing a personnel file carefully across the table toward me. "She worked in post-surgical care for 3 years. We've confirmed that she received several payments from a Huxley shell company totaling over 25,000 United States dollars within the last 6 months. She has admitted to manipulating your medication," she added. "I needed to know the entire truth, no matter how painful it might be." Agent Cole and Agent Dana exchanged tense glances. "She's cooperating," Cole said cautiously. "According to her statement, she was ordered to prolong your recovery by adjusting specific medications and introducing a mild bacterial contamination during intravenous changes." My stomach churned at the coldness of that clinical phrasing. What it really meant was calculated, deliberate harm. She could have killed me. She claims she calibrated the contamination just enough to extend your hospitalization without actually risking your life. Dana added, her tone filled with disgust, as if that fact somehow softened the inhumanity of what had been done. And Brielle, she orchestrated all of this. The question almost sounded rhetorical. Deep down, I already knew the answer. Graham Huxley made the initial contact with Lowell, Cole confirmed. But evidence clearly indicates that Brielle designed the specific execution. Text messages recovered from her phone include pointed questions about your treatment schedule, your medication regimen, and anticipated discharge dates. I closed my eyes for a moment, still trying to absorb the depth of the cruelty involved in all of this. My own daughter-in-law had deliberately prolonged my suffering just to buy more time for their twisted scheme. "And what about Caleb's involvement?" Marilyn asked finally, voicing the question I could not bring myself to say aloud. "We found no evidence that he knew about the medical manipulation," Agent Dana responded calmly. "His cooperation has been extensive, and we believe it to be genuine. The prosecution now considers his testimony to be crucial in sustaining the broader case against the Huxleys." At least that was one small relief. My son had betrayed me deeply, but he had not conspired to physically harm me. That distinction was significant, though it could not erase the immense pain his actions had caused. "Is there anything else I should see?" Agent Cole asked, sliding yet another folder across the polished conference table toward me. This was recovered from Brielle's private email account. Inside the folder was a chilling series of messages between Brielle and her parents, dating back almost 2 years. They had meticulously crafted a detailed plan to seize control of my assets, starting by isolating me from family and friends, then gradually taking over my financial affairs, and finally relocating me to a long-term care facility once everything had been placed under legal control. That level of cold calculation made my hands tremble as I turned each page. They had targeted me long before my hip surgery ever became necessary, seeing my physical decline as a prime opportunity for exploitation. My hospitalization only served to accelerate their timeline. And this, Cole continued, his voice a shade darker, is perhaps the most disturbing part. He placed before me a printed advertisement for a luxury retirement community located in Arizona. It was accompanied by an email from Brielle to her parents. "Perfect location for Lorraine once everything is finalized. Isolated minimal supervision, and the memory unit admits patients without too much medical documentation. Once she's there, we'll have absolute control over all visits and communications. They had planned to institutionalize me, effectively imprison me, in a place far from anyone who truly knew me, where I would be easily forgotten while they enjoyed the fruits of their stolen wealth. There will be additional charges based on this evidence," Agent Dana explained. "Elder abuse conspiracy, and possibly even attempted homicide, depending on how the prosecutor chooses to interpret the medical manipulation." I nodded slowly, too overwhelmed to speak right away. The sheer magnitude of what they had planned, the calculated destruction, not only of my financial stability, but of my freedom, my dignity, was almost impossible to truly comprehend. "When can I go home?" I finally asked. It was the question that had haunted me for weeks. "The forensic team finished at your residence yesterday," Cole replied. "Technically, you could return now, although we still recommend waiting until we confirm there are no outstanding security risks." "I want to go today," I said firmly, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to be back in my own space." Marilyn squeezed my hand supportively. "I'll stay with you the first few days. We can install additional security if needed." Agent Dana nodded. "We can arrange that, but there is another matter we need to address." She paused, her expression growing more careful. "Caleb has requested another meeting with you. He'll be transferred to a minimum security prison pending trial, and he's asked to see you before that." My first instinct was to refuse. The wound of his betrayal was still so raw, and I was not sure I had the emotional strength for another confrontation. Yet something deep within me, perhaps the part of me that still remembered the boy he once was, could not bring myself to refuse that request. "Tomorrow morning, if that is agreeable," Agent Dana replied when I asked directly. "After that, his visits will be extremely limited until the legal proceedings officially conclude." I nodded slowly. "I'll see him then." That same afternoon, I stood silently on my front porch, the key held in my hand, hesitating just before putting it in the lock. The facade of the house looked unchanged, still familiar, but I knew with absolute certainty that inside strangers had invaded my sanctuary. They had plotted my downfall in a place that should have meant peace, comfort, and safety. "Take your time," Marilyn said softly beside me. "This is going to be difficult." I took a long, steadying breath and turned the key. The scent of my home, the gleam of aged wood, the dusty warmth of old books, the faint trace of lavender from the sachets I placed lovingly in the closets, was now masked by unfamiliar perfumes and synthetic cleaning products. There were subtle details that revealed the Huxleys' brief occupation. The furniture had barely been moved, but it felt wrong. My favorite orchid was gone from the sunroom. New curtains now hung in the living room. In my study, Russell's antique desk had been turned toward the door instead of the window where he always sat, looking out at the garden he cherished. That minimal change hit me much harder than I expected. They had erased our routines, our quiet rituals, our history. "We can put everything back the way it was," Marilyn assured me, noticing my expression. "Make it yours again." I nodded slowly, moving through each room, carefully noting the changes and the violations. In the master bedroom, my clothes were gone from the closet, replaced by Brielle's expensive suits. My small, well-worn jewelry box had been emptied. The pieces Russell had given me over so many years of life together were nowhere in sight. The FBI recovered most of your jewelry from the Huxley safe deposit box Agent Dana had told me earlier. They will return them once they finish processing them as evidence. It was a small comfort knowing that strangers had handled those intimate memories of my marriage, reducing them to items of monetary, not emotional value. In the kitchen, my handwritten collection of recipe cards, many from my mother and grandmother, utterly irreplaceable, had been thrown away. In their place were glossy, untouched modern cookbooks, carefully displayed, but clearly never used. That kind of disdain felt deeply personal, as if they had deliberately erased my family's story, cutting deeper than even the financial theft. As I slowly surveyed the damage, a strange and unfamiliar calm settled over me. This house, these things they had been violated, yes, but they were still mine. I had survived. I had fought and reclaimed what had been stolen from me. The Huxley family had completely underestimated my resilience, my resources, and my relentless determination. "I'm staying," I decided, turning to Marilyn. "Tonight, in my house." "Are you sure?" she asked gently, concern written on her face. "Couldn't we start fresh tomorrow?" "I'm sure," I replied, with a new strength rising in my voice. "I'm not going to let them keep me away from my own home for even one more night." As evening descended, I sat quietly on the back porch with a cup of tea in hand, watching twilight settle over the garden that Russell and I had planted together decades ago. The roses needed pruning. The hydrangeas had been neglected, overgrown, and forgotten, but the essence of what we had created in this garden was still there. Tomorrow would bring more difficult conversations with Caleb, more exhausting legal procedures, and the long, slow process of rebuilding not only my home, but also my life. But tonight, in this moment, I had reclaimed my space. It was a beginning, however fragile it was mine. As the investigation continued to unfold, I was forced to face a terrifying truth. Brielle and her parents had orchestrated a scheme far more perverse and malevolent than simple financial theft. Evidence showed that they had deliberately hindered my medical recovery with the active complicity of a corrupt nurse. They had planned to have me institutionalized in an isolated care facility and had been methodically stalking me for almost 2 full years. Although Caleb appeared oblivious to the darkest corners of this conspiracy, the calculated cruelty of what they had prepared for me was too monstrous to fully absorb. Standing inside my violated home, seeing firsthand how they had tried to erase every trace of my married life, I came to understand that a long and painful road lay ahead, not only to recover my property, but to restore my sense of security and identity. Tomorrow I would face another confrontation with my son before he was transferred to a facility while awaiting trial. A conversation I dreaded, but knew I could not avoid, not if I truly wanted to understand how our family had fractured so completely. The visitation room at the detention center was brighter than I had imagined, with harsh fluorescent lights bouncing off pale yellow walls in a failed attempt to lend cheer. Caleb sat at a small metal table, dressed in a standard issue uniform that now hung loosely on his frame. He had clearly lost weight since his arrest, his face drawn, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and regret. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly as I sat across from him. This time, no lawyer was present. "It was your decision, they told me earlier." "You wanted to see me," I replied, keeping my voice steady and calm. "Well, here I am." He nodded slowly, lowering his gaze to his hands, which he now gripped tightly on the table. "They told me about the nurse, what Brielle and her parents had planned for you." "Yes," I said, adding nothing more. I waited. "I swear, Mom, I did not know." His voice cracked ever so slightly. "I knew they wanted your house, your money. That alone was bad enough, unforgivable. But I never imagined they would." He fell silent, unable to put into words the full horror of what they had plotted. "I believe you," I said quietly, and he snapped his head up, eyes wide with surprise. "You believe me? About that specific part?" "Yes." I nodded. "I have seen enough evidence to believe you were not aware of their plan to physically harm me or to have me institutionalized." I spoke in a measured, objective tone. "But you did know about their plans to take everything that belonged to me, and you willingly participated in that theft." He flinched, but said nothing to deny it. "Yes." "Why, Caleb?" The question that had haunted me for weeks finally passed my lips. "You grew up with every advantage. Your father and I taught you about integrity, about respecting others. What happened to that boy?" Caleb remained silent for a long time, as if struggling to gather the courage to say what needed to be said. "I have asked myself the same question every night in my cell," he finally replied. "The easy answer is that I was weak. I was afraid of losing Brielle if I did not do what she wanted. I was terrified of the financial consequences if her father exposed my involvement in earlier deceptions. And the difficult answer I pressed gently. The difficult answer, he said, looking directly into my eyes, is that at some point I started to believe I deserved more than I had earned, that it was justified to cheat, if that is how I got what I wanted." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I became someone I don't even recognize, someone Dad would have been ashamed of." The mention of Russell, who had once been so proud of our son, who had dreamt of the man he would become, pierced my chest with a sharp and sudden pain. Your father would be disappointed, I admitted, without a trace of doubt, and I am too. But I think what would disappoint him most would not be the fact that you made mistakes, but that you betrayed your own principles in order to cover them up. Caleb nodded slowly, accepting that truth without offering excuses. The prosecutors have offered me a plea deal, he said. 5 years, reduced to 3, with good behavior in exchange for my full testimony against Brielle and her parents. Are you going to accept it? Yes, he replied without hesitation. It's more clemency than I probably deserve. We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of all that had transpired hanging heavy between us. My son would spend years in prison. The life he had once known had vanished entirely. The bright and hopeful future that Russell and I had imagined for him had been reduced to this sterile visitation room lit by cold, unforgiving fluorescent lights. I found something in the house yesterday, I said, gently changing the subject. At the bottom of your father's desk drawer. I reached into my purse and pulled out a worn, slightly yellowed envelope. It's a letter he wrote to you before he passed away. He asked me to give it to you when I believed you needed it the most. I think that time is now. Caleb's hand trembled slightly as he accepted the envelope, turning it over slowly to see his name written in Russell's unmistakable handwriting. I didn't know this existed, he whispered. During his final months, he wrote several letters. I said quietly, this was the last one. I watched as he opened it carefully, almost reverently, as if the paper might disintegrate under the weight of his fingers. I remained silent while he read, watching the emotions shift across his face. Pain, deep shame, and finally, something that resembled determination. When he finished, he folded the letter slowly and held it against his chest for a long, still moment before returning it gently to the envelope. Thank you for bringing this, he said, his voice noticeably firmer. I needed to hear his voice again, even if the circumstances are... He gestured vaguely at the bleak surroundings around us. What will you do afterward? I asked softly. When you've served your sentence. The question seemed to surprise him. Perhaps he had not allowed himself to think that far ahead. Perhaps he had not expected me to imagine a future for him beyond punishment. I don't know, he admitted honestly. My career and my finances are over. Obviously, my reputation. He shrugged an empty, defeated gesture that said more than words ever could about the ruin of his former life. You'll have to rebuild yourself, I told him gently, not just practically, but morally as well. And that's the hardest kind of work there is. I know. He hesitated for a moment, then asked the question that had clearly been pressing on his heart the most. Will you ever be able to forgive me, Mom? I thought carefully before answering, refusing to offer easy phrases or false comfort. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Caleb. It's a process. Right now, I'm still processing the pain, the betrayal, the impact of discovering what you became. I looked him directly in the eyes. I don't know if complete forgiveness is possible, I said slowly, but I do know one thing. You are still my son. That biological truth does not change. How our relationship will be from this point on will depend entirely on the decisions you make from this moment forward. He nodded, accepting that partial answer with unexpected calm and humility. It's fair, he said quietly, more than fair. Our time was almost up. A guard approached the table, ready to escort him back to his cell. As we stood to say goodbye, he asked one final question. The house. Will you stay there after everything that happened? Yes, I replied, my voice unwavering. It's my home. I will not allow what they did to drive me away from the life that your father and I built with love and sacrifice. Good, he murmured softly. Dad would have wanted that. As I watched him walk away, his shoulders held high. Despite everything, I felt an unexpected sense of closure settle in. It was not healing, not yet. That would take much longer, but it was the beginning of understanding. My son had made devastating decisions. He had betrayed me in ways that may never be fully repaired. But beneath the man who had participated in the Huxley scheme, fragments of the boy I raised still remained faint but visible. Outside the detention center, Marilyn was waiting for me in her car, a quiet presence I had come to trust deeply during these turbulent weeks. How did it go? She asked gently as I settled into the passenger seat beside her. As well as could be expected, I replied, watching the autumn leaves swirl across the pavement of the parking lot. He accepted a plea deal, 5 years, possibly reduced to 3. And how do you feel about that? I paused, reflecting for a long moment, allowing myself to truly examine my feelings. Sad, relieved, still angry, but less so than before. Most things are clearer to me now, I said finally about what happened and where we're going. Marilyn nodded understanding without needing any further words. As we drove back toward my real home, reclaimed and in the process of quiet restoration, I thought about everything I had lived through these past months, from the shock of betrayal to the fierce fight for justice, from the horror of discovering what they had planned for me to this fragile moment of resolution. The road ahead was still long and complicated. Legal proceedings against Brielle and her parents would drag on for many more months. Fully securing my assets and rebuilding the foundations of my life would require time and patience. My relationship with my son, if it could be salvaged at all, would take years of effort, trust building, and honesty. But for the first time since waking up from surgery and discovering that my world had collapsed, I felt a flicker of genuine hope for the future. Not because the path ahead would be easy, but because I had unearthed a strength within myself that I never imagined I had. As we turned onto my street, the setting sun bathed the facade of my house in a soft golden light that seemed to promise new beginnings amidst the many painful endings. In the cold, sterile light of the detention center's visitation room, I had finally heard the truth from my son's own lips, his confession of moral failure, his admission of having strayed from the values that Russell and I had tried so hard to instill in him. Though I saw him truly horrified by the physical harm that Brielle and her parents had plotted against me, he took full responsibility for the theft of my assets and now faced a plea deal that would send him to prison for years. I gave him his father's final gift, a letter Russell wrote before he died, saved for the moment Caleb would need it the most. His question about forgiveness had no easy answer. All I could offer was the truth about the long and uncertain road that lay ahead for both of us. Leaving the detention center, I felt an unexpected clarity. It was not healing yet, not fully, but it was the first step toward the new reality quietly awaiting us both. With my house steadily being restored and justice set firmly into motion, I found myself looking forward rather than anchored in memories of the past, recognizing a strength I had never known I carried. That's the last one, Marilyn said, placing a framed family portrait carefully on the newly installed shelf in my living room. 6 months had passed since my last encounter with Caleb at the detention center. 6 months of slowly, patiently rebuilding my home, my finances, and most importantly, my sense of personal safety and security. It looks just like it should, I commented, glancing around the living room with a quiet satisfaction. The furniture had returned to its proper places. The curtains had been replaced with styles I personally liked, and the subtle traces of the Huxleys' unwelcome presence had been thoroughly erased. Better than right, Marilyn countered, nodding toward the new security system panel by the front door. It's safer now than it has ever been. She was absolutely right. Everything I had endured had led to very real practical improvements, reinforced locks, a comprehensive home security system, and new stricter protocols for managing all of my financial accounts. The fragility that had allowed the Huxleys to infiltrate my life had been identified and sealed shut against any future threat. The roses are blooming again, too, I added, looking out the large window toward the back garden, where the first signs of spring were beginning to emerge. I had spent long hours replanting and tending the flower beds, which had been abandoned during the Huxleys' occupation, and found in that process an unexpected therapy and a deep reconnection with the earth beneath me. Marilyn smiled, understanding the quiet metaphor in my words. If they're coming back with proper care and time, she said gently, then recovery is possible. The past few months had indeed brought undeniable progress. Brielle and her parents were now facing an avalanche of federal charges, fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, and attempted homicide due to the medical manipulation. The evidence against them, bolstered by Caleb's detailed testimony, had been overwhelming. To avoid a highly publicized trial with long sentences looming, they each accepted plea bargains. 20 years for Graham, 15 for Denise, and 18 for Brielle. The magnitude of their criminal network had proven to be even larger than initially suspected, with victims eventually identified across 3 different states. The nurse who had deliberately altered my medication, Kendra Lowell, received a sentence of 8 years, reduced to 5, in exchange for testifying about other vulnerable patients the Huxleys had targeted. The investigation even uncovered 2 previous cases of elderly homeowners who had died under suspicious circumstances after becoming involved with Huxley Crest Holdings, which were now being reopened as potential homicides. My own neighborhood had been spared from the predatory rezoning plan. With the Huxleys' operation exposed, the properties they had wrongfully acquired were being returned to their rightful owners or to their heirs where applicable. The community in response had united to create a support network for seniors, ensuring protection from similar schemes in the future. "Have you decided about the visit?" Marilyn asked, gently pulling me from my thoughts as she served 2 tall glasses of iced tea. The visit she referred to was Caleb's latest request. Now, after serving 3 months in a minimum security facility, he had written to ask if I would consider seeing him again. His letters sent weekly since his incarceration began had always respected my emotional boundaries. He assumed no forgiveness, made no demands, but consistently expressed remorse and detailed his efforts at rehabilitation. "I think I'll go," I said, surprised by the calm certainty in my voice. "Not next week. I have the Garden Club fundraiser, but perhaps the week after that." Marilyn nodded, her expression measured and carefully neutral. "You seem calmer about the idea than a month ago." "I dreamed of Russell last night," I explained quietly, and that memory brought me unexpected solace. We were sitting on the porch swing, just talking like we used to. He told me something that has stayed with me all day. Healing does not mean erasing the wound. It means finding purpose in the scar. "That sounds like Russell," Marilyn commented with a soft, knowing smile. "He always found wisdom in difficult times, even when everything felt impossible." I woke up thinking about Caleb. I continued. And how some wounds never fully close, but perhaps they can still lead to something meaningful. Not going back to what once was, but choosing to move forward towards something new. Our conversation was suddenly interrupted by the doorbell. On the screen of my new tablet, connected directly to the upgraded security camera, I saw a delivery person standing with a large floral arrangement. Expecting flowers, Marilyn asked with curiosity as she moved toward the door. No, I replied, feeling a familiar twinge of caution rise inside me. That old weariness had not disappeared entirely. Distrust was not something that vanished overnight, even with new locks and modern systems. Marilyn checked the delivery person's credentials before accepting the bouquet. It was a stunning arrangement, lilies and irises, my favorites. The small card attached read simply, "Thinking of you on your birthday. Your neighbor, Vivian Calloway." I smiled, deeply touched by the gesture. Vivian Calloway had moved into the house across the street just over 3 months ago, a retired literature professor with quick wit, curious mind, and a taste in books remarkably similar to mine. We had slowly developed a genuine friendship, exchanging gardening tips and recommending novels over afternoon tea. She had lost her husband around the same time I lost Russell, which created an unspoken but powerful bond of shared grief and quiet resilience between us. "What a lovely gesture," Marilyn said, sincerely admiring the delicate arrangement. "You're really building a strong community here." She was right. After the Huxley scandal, I had made a conscious, deliberate decision to strengthen my human connections rather than retreat into fear or isolation. The neighborhood book club I founded now met monthly right in my living room. The senior community center, where I volunteered twice a week, had become a place of unexpected friendships and renewed confidence. The local garden club welcomed me with enthusiasm for my experience in cultivating heirloom roses and had even appointed me head of the annual flower exhibition. These new, freely chosen relationships had become my strongest defense, my lasting safeguard against any future vulnerability. "I've been thinking about the foundation," I said thoughtfully as we settled into the patio swing with our cups of tea. "The Russell Whitlow Research Trust," I clarified, referring to the organization my husband had created before his death, designed to fund research into the rare heart condition that had ultimately ended his life. "What about it?" Marilyn asked. "I want to expand its mission," I explained slowly. "Add a division focused on elder protection, legal support, fraud prevention, educational outreach, and victim services." Marilyn's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "You want to use your experience to help others who may face similar dangers?" "Exactly," I said. "The Huxleys had dozens of victims before they ever targeted me. Most of them didn't have the resources or legal knowledge to defend themselves. I want to change that for others." "That's a wonderful idea," Marilyn said warmly. "Russell would be incredibly proud." "I think so too," I replied, gazing out at the neighborhood I had fought so hard to reclaim, the place where I had managed to rebuild my sense of home security and purpose in the scar, just as he used to say. As afternoon slowly faded into evening, we remained seated in comfortable silence, watching neighbors return from work and children playing in nearby yards. The pulse of the community beating around us felt steady and true. The trauma of what I had endured would never fully vanish. There would always be sudden moments of heightened alertness, emotional flashbacks, echoes of betrayal rising without warning. But those scars no longer dictated my daily rhythm. Instead, they had become quiet sources of wisdom, deeper empathy, and a renewed sense of purpose that I never expected to find. Later that evening, after Marilyn had gone home, I sat at Russell's desk, now correctly placed back in front of the garden window, and began outlining the new structure for the Foundation's expanded mission. As I typed, something clicked into place inside me. A silent cycle was closing. The Huxleys had targeted me because they saw what they assumed was a fragile, isolated widow, easy prey. But this foundation, rebuilt with intention, would become a line of defense for others like me. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, a meeting with the foundation board, preparations for my upcoming visit to Caleb, and tending to the garden, still healing from seasons of neglect. But for the first time in many months, I was not bracing myself out of survival. I was genuinely looking forward to what lay ahead. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Vivian Calloway, the neighbor from across the street. She was checking in to see whether the flowers had arrived in good shape and inviting me to a chamber music concert next weekend. As we spoke, I realized just how much my life had shifted in the 6 months since reclaiming my home. The betrayal had shattered something essential, my trust in family, in the sanctity of familiar places. But from that break, something entirely new had emerged, a strength I hadn't known I carried, a circle of connection I never expected, a mission far greater than myself, finding purpose in the scar. I whispered aloud as I hung up. Russell's words lingered in my thoughts, echoing with clarity, not to erase the wound, but to allow it to transform into something meaningful. 6 months after confronting Caleb, I now stand in a quiet chapter of renewal. My home is restored, the roses are blooming, and the news has arrived that Brielle and her parents have accepted their sentences. Their sprawling criminal enterprise has been dismantled. The neighborhood they tried to exploit has unified in collective protection. I have formed new friendships, built community, and found joy in small rituals again. When Caleb requests another visit, I say yes, not because I have forgotten, but because I have learned how to carry what happened without letting it weigh down my spirit. And in this process, I give shape to something lasting. The Russell Whitlow Research Trust will soon include elder advocacy, fraud prevention, legal aid, and emotional recovery services. My private suffering becomes a public shield, a legacy I am proud to build. Even now, I know there will be quiet days of grief, triggers I cannot control. But I also know that pain, when transformed with purpose, becomes the foundation of some of the best revenge stories, not through destruction, but through protection, through building, through truth. Because although betrayal broke something inside me, that rupture created space. And in that space, I planted something deeper than anger. I planted truth. I planted justice. I planted grace. This story, my story, is a reminder that evil will always eventually expose itself. And those who walk with integrity, even when shattered, will always rise again with dignity, with resilience, with peace. If this were your story, what would you have done? Would you have walked away quietly or stood your ground like I did? Share your thoughts below your story, your scars, your strength. I read every comment, and I truly want to hear what you think. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you reflect on your own journey or someone you love, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell icon so you never miss one of our real-life lessons or emotional journeys. And do not miss the next video. We'll feature another case that will stay with you long after the screen fades. Thank you for watching. Thank you for standing with me. I'll see you in the next story.